Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. Welcome to our special guest, Marty Strong. Now, Marty's a former Navy SEAL. He's also a businessman and the author of Be Nimble, How the Creative Navy SEAL Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business. So welcome, Marty. Super cool to have you on the podcast. As I sort of said in the preview, I have not had someone from Special Forces on. So really interested to talk to you and to understand, what people look for in the Special Forces and what relevance that may have out in the business world. So I want to kick it off, though, by just finding out, did you always want to be in the Special Forces? Like, how did that come about?
No, actually, I was a very undersized young man. I was probably 125 pounds when I started the SEAL training course.
Really? Wow.
And I'd say and I was 17 years old, almost just turning 18 during that training. I think, most of the participants in the course, the selection process were probably between 150 and 165 pounds. They were all pretty lean and, athletes. Eventually, once we all graduated and went on to the SEAL teams, we started lifting weights and putting muscle on, and we were, getting older. So we were getting out of that teenage body mode. But no, I was very undersized. I didn't aspire to be a SEAL or a Green Beret or even a Marine. But I joined the Navy and I ended up going through air traffic control and radar school. And it turned out that while I was in boot camp prior to that school, I took a swim test, and somehow my social security number got on a clipboard. The swim test was actually it was dual purpose. It was to show a bunch of people who was the fastest in the boot camp company, so they could do a bunch of relay competitions. But it was also the SEAL screening test.
Right.
So my name got on the SEAL screening test, and you have to volunteer. So it was a mistake. And I graduated 17 weeks of air traffic control and radar, and they gave me orders to SEAL training, Coronado, California. And I'm like, what?
Even though you hadn't volunteered.
I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know what the letters stood for. It was a long time ago.
Right.
It was before there were movies and everything. So it was it was all serendipity. I just, fate, whatever you want to call it. And when I got there, I thought I'd be able to figure out how to fix my orders and get me to a ship so I could be a radar guy. And they talked me into just staying and trying it. So 20 years later.
You're young. So you were young though, weren't you? Because these days, do they still take them that young into SEAL training?
Yeah.
That's young.
Actually, there's a limit. I don't think you can be any older than 28 or 29 now, because there's a 2-year grooming process and before you're considered, an actual SEAL. Unlike, say, the Army Special Forces, whether it's British, Aussie, Kiwi, SAS, which are Army, or the American Green Beret Army Special Forces, they pull from infantry. They pull from people that have already been through training to be a soldier, to use a rifle and to patrol and all that. In the SEALs, we're pulling right from high schools and colleges and from Navy ships. And so we aren't starting with infantry. We're starting with raw volunteers.
Raw recruits.
So when they get a little bit of the infantry, a little bit of dive training, a lot of screening. So when you finally graduate from that, you go into another 4-month concentration of more intermediate skills in all the categories. You learn how to jump out of airplanes and a lot of other things. Then you get out of that and you go into about a 6-month more advanced phase. So it takes about 2 years, just a different approach than, say, the Army Special Forces do around the world.
And what do you think the rationale for that is? Is that so that they can kind of mold people more? What's the thought train on that?
The idea of having Navy commandos so for example, the maritime commandos for the British military are Marines. they're Royal Marines that become SBS Special Boat Service commandos.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
same kind of pedigree, right? They're already essentially infantry trained. But in the U.S. Navy, there's no equivalent. So I guess they had a choice, and they tried this during World War II and in Korea and a little bit in Vietnam. They started out with Marine Special Units, Marine Corps, Marine Corps Marines that were given special jobs. They were put into special units, and it didn't work all the time. And then the Navy was asked to go in and scout beaches for landings in North Africa, Sicily, eventually D-Day in France, also all the islands in the Pacific. So they would swim in, they would sketch whatever the Japanese or the Germans or the Italians, whoever the bad guys were at the time, sketch where their positions were, bring that information back. So they're essentially, reconnaissance and not fighters. And they ended up creating hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these guys across the globe. But their job wasn't to fight. So at the very end of the war, they started using them for light commando raids, blowing little bridges, just small stuff, because they were expert in demolitions, at blowing up obstacles and blowing up coral reefs. So blowing up a bridge isn't a big deal, but they had to carry a rifle in case they had to shoot at somebody shooting at them. And that's kind of where it stopped. And then in Korea, same kind of thing. They started up an Army Special Ops unit, a Marine Corps Special Ops unit. And eventually, because the Navy owned the ships and they had to come from the sea, the Navy developed their frogman, their recon guys, into actual commandos. And that's how the whole tradition went on. Then Vietnam that's where it all kind of got solidified. President Kennedy in '62 created the SEAL teams. It's just that there's nothing in the Navy to draw from.
Yeah.
Like there's no infantry equivalent. So you have to start from scratch.
So can you just explain to me, I'm just interested because I'm interested in all this sort of stuff, but the Marines, I thought the Marines were originally part of the Navy, but I think they then split off into their own unit. What's the connection between the Marines and the Navy?
So you're right. The original design of the United States Marine Corps was to put Marines on Navy ships, and the Marines were created to go fight the Barbary pirates off the north coast of Africa.
Right. Okay.
Off of Tripoli. And then after that initial, President Thomas Jefferson created the Marines for that purpose. So they were basically being carried as infantry troops to be deployed from U.S. Navy ships and go ashore and fight the pirates and everything. And so then they kind of evolved into guards on the ship. So they were just guys that were there to guard the ship, because in those days, they would try to board each other's ships. And so they were there to fight off the other guys. And the British Marines were actually already established as a ship's fighting force to board other ships. So eventually that was kind of the reason why the Marine Corps was always attached underneath the Navy. The Navy was the senior service. But later on, mostly in World War II, the Marine Corps had to get bigger because of the Pacific campaigns. And so it got so huge, it was almost like a mini army by itself.
Yeah.
And it became too ponderous for the Department of the Navy, for ship guys to start telling, 100,000 Marines what to do in ground combat. That's where the disconnect started.
Right.
I think technically they're in the Department of the Navy, but they have their own 4-star general that's equal to the 4-star admiral in the Navy. So they're all equals now.
Right. Yeah, okay. No, interesting. I know it's slightly off topic, but it's interesting to learn about all that sort of stuff and how it works. So, okay, so what was training like? What was selection like? Because, the stories you hear is extremely challenging. So can you talk us through that? And especially being, 17 years old? Boy, I'm really interested to hear about that.
Yeah, so there's an advantage to being really young. And there's a couple of advantages. One advantage is you might not know better. You don't realize what you're doing is crazy because you haven't had enough life experience to compare anything to it. The second thing is, you bounce back fast. It's physical training, physical hardship is kind of like drinking. If you're 20 years old and you drink, you get up next morning, you can go for a run, you can go to work and everything. When you're 50 years old, you drink all night, you get up and you have to take a week off. your body just isn't as resilient. So the older you are, the longer it takes for your body to recover from the physical stress and damage. that something like any selection course would put you through. That's one of the reasons why we have an age limit. So it's essentially a psychological it's a psychological platform, especially the first 1/3 of the SEAL training. It's broken into three different phases. And the reason I say it is because the perception from the outside looking in is all the physicality of it. You know, you're running, you're carrying things, you know, everybody looks exhausted and all that. And so you think, oh, okay, so if you're a really great athlete, or if you're really strong, or you're really fast, you're probably going to be okay. Yeah. But what you don't realize is that all those events don't last for like one event and then you go home and do something else. They last continuously for 6 months. It's a whole process of breaking you down physically. And the reason for that, the objective of that, is so that psychologically you start to question yourself. You start to question the little voice inside your head starts to tell you this isn't really for you. You really can't do this. You're probably not going to make it anyway. You probably should just stop the pain now and just go do something else. And that battle with the voice in your head is what we're trying to get to in the selection process. We want you to kind of come face to face with your fears and your kind of your negative self, and either win or lose that battle. And all the instructor, and I was an instructor 8 years later. I came back and I was in charge of that I was in charge of that first 9 weeks of selection. So the psychology is pretty simple, and it doesn't take violence. It doesn't take evil torture. It's just some really straightforward, carry a sandbag from one point to the other point until you can't lift anything anymore. And then, okay, now I want you to run in circles till you can't run anymore, and then do jumping jacks. It's really simple, straightforward. It's boring if you're an instructor, but you get the results you want, because you start to see the class separate psychologically first, and then physically with, they vote with their feet. Volunteers, so they can quit anytime they want. My class usually takes about 500 students or prospective students to be vetted to create a class of about 125. Wow. So that's the first breakout. That 125 starts, and on average back to 1962, 25% graduate. Yeah. They've had one class that nobody graduated. They've had my class.
Really?
My class had 13 out of 126. And you lose at least half of them in the first couple of weeks of the training because they decide this isn't for them. The instructors, they're just creating the environment. So why do you want to do that? Why do you want to have somebody make a psychological commitment to themselves? Well, because that's the kind of person you need in a special operations unit. You want them first to make a commitment to themselves, and then you want them to have a commitment to the brothers in arms around them, because you're going in small teams. You have to be 100% capable and 100% contribution if you're a 2 or 4 man team. You can't have anybody that doesn't carry their load, and you just can't afford to. So that goes all the way back to World War II. The lessons learned that our Navy course was established over time based on the hard won lessons of those combat eras. And it's been proven out in war after war. We really haven't changed it much, quite frankly, since 1962. So so as a 17-year-old, you're going through, and my theory, based on a lot of observation and being a student myself, is that if you have any kind of background up to the point you go into that selection process where you were able to build some kind of self-confidence and resilience, where you don't feel like you don't need other people to give you a pat on the back to feel special, that you've actually fallen down and gotten back up and kept going. If you have anything like that in your past, you're probably better than 50-50 chance you're going to win that fight with that voice in your head.
So tell me,
go ahead.
Sorry, I just really, the thing that's coming through to me is you didn't ask to be there. You're there by accident. Like I mentioned, a lot of recruits would have been, that was their boyhood dream, potentially, was to be a Navy SEAL, or at least it is these days. Maybe it wasn't so well known then, but a lot of them would have been there because they wanted to be there. You're kind of there by accident. So I would have thought you would have been on the back foot right from the get-go, because you didn't have the passion there. You're just there, rather than some of these other ones would have been really determined that was their calling and they wanted to do it. So how did that play out for you?
It's funny you say that. When we were gathering for about 2 weeks before the class started, we had guys showing up in the barracks, and guys were doing martial arts, katas. And I had a guy, he was sitting there sharpening a Marine Corps K-bar knife. And I said, why do you sharpen that all the time? He said, well, my father gave it to me. My father got the Navy Cross in the Korean War. He was in the Chosin Reservoir when the Chinese overran and all this other stuff. And I go, oh. And I said, so your dad wanted you to be a SEAL, not a Marine? He goes, no. My dad didn't think I was tough enough to be a Marine. So I decided to become a SEAL and show him. I'm like, and this guy's been thinking about this since he's 12 years old.
Wow.
And the more I would run into guys in those 2 weeks prior to the start of the course, it was exactly what you're saying. I was thinking to myself, what am I doing here? Everybody around here is like committed, dedicated. We had guys that had gone out and bought jungle boots and had been running up and down sand beaches someplace for months preparing, And I'm like,
yeah, exactly.
I'm going to get slaughtered. I'm not going to, there's no way I can do this. The thing that happens though, it's kind of like a conveyor belt. You put that first foot forward on that first day, and the program just takes you, and you're in this whirlwind of nonstop activity. I mean, you're running to and from breakfast is 1 mile there, 1 mile back. You have to run to all 3 meals. So you're putting in 6 miles of running in formation, and it doesn't count as any of the other training you're going to have that day. So if you have a 10-mile beach run in the sand, you put in 16 miles of running that day, but you've also been paddling boats in the ocean. You've also been in a pool for 2 hours. I mean, I'm talking about fatigue. They feed you. They let you eat as much as you want, because they couldn't get away with all that, because they're not worried about, say, Army Ranger School in the United States. Their crucible is breaking you down by not feeding you. It's a combination. Wow. Yeah, it's a combination of like, deprivation as far as calorie deprivation and also sleep deprivation. And that's kind of what their method is. For us, we get fed because they're going to keep pushing us. They want you to make the mental decision, not to have some physical reason for saying I can't do this. So I didn't think I should have been there. I'm glad I got to the first day and the first step, because you end up kind of looking up 3 or 4 days later and wondering how the hell you got there. And you're in a barracks room, and you've got 4 people to a room, and every day you go in there and one of the bunks is pushed up against the wall, and the locker's empty, and you're like, what happened to Bob? It's almost like it's almost like combat. You make friends with these guys, and then after a while you say, I don't want to make friends with anybody because they're not going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah. And the thing is for you though, like, you had an easy out because you didn't ask to be there. You just said by accident. So it's easy for you to go, oh, look, this isn't for me. I'm out of here. Whereas someone else who like told their family, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL and my father was in the military and all that, would have all that pressure to keep going. But you had none of that. You had no pressure. So what was it in your DNA that made you stick at it when you really had no pressure to do that?
I think I was a little naive in that I trust people that I feel that are trustworthy. And the very senior enlisted, the top senior rank Master Chief in the Navy, who talked to me that day when I showed up and said, there's a mistake. This guy had 5 combat tours in Vietnam, and he was 5'6", and he pulled me into an office, and he looked at my orders. He goes, yeah, you're not supposed to be here. We can't even take guys like you because you're restricted, because of the radar and all that stuff. And then he starts asking me questions. Did you swim? Yeah. I lived in Hawaii for a while. I surfed. You're not afraid of the ocean? No. And you ever play sports? Yeah, I played football. The instructor or the coaches ever yell at you? Yeah. They ever punish you if you were doing something wrong? Yeah, I had to run bleacher steps and stuff. He basically walked me into, I'd already been through SEAL training. He goes, just give it a shot. What's the worst thing that can happen? You're going to end up going to a ship, and you're going to do the thing that you went to school to do.
Yeah.
And I go, okay. So when the first day of training shows up, we get put in a classroom, and the instructors for that first phase are marched in their dress uniforms. And they get up there, and not one of them is 5'6". So it's kind of a switch and bait in a way. The first guy was a Medal of Honor winner, 6'3" tall guy named Mike Thornton. And everybody else was, they're all, 8, 9 rows of medals. And I'm like, oh boy, So almost every time after that first day where I said, okay, I'll try it, I kept running into situations where it was clear I shouldn't be there. But I guess I was kind of the voice in my head was a really short question, like, "Are you nuts?" It wasn't a long conversation. It wasn't a deep conversation. And I don't know. I don't really know why. The theme is don't quit. I don't know what in my upbringing. My dad didn't sit there every day and scream at me not to quit. I wasn't like I was preconditioned not to quit.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with it, because they try all these different tricks in pre-screening and evaluating the candidates to get a higher yield out of the 6-month course.
Yeah.
And they don't. It's always been like 25%. They teach them to do push-ups better ahead of time. They make them faster. Well, it's not about that. It's about what's up here between your ears. And so they keep getting 25%. Yeah. So whatever it was, I guess I had whatever it was required, because, and I tell you, the only day I was really satisfied and happy and congratulated myself was graduation day. And that afternoon, on getting in the plane to go to Army parachute school, I started going, "Oh no," because I didn't know if I was ever going to make it to graduation right up until the day of graduation. And then I made it. And for about half a day, I was excited and happy. And then I was back to, I got to jump out of an airplane now. So,
yeah. And so for you, how close do you think you got to quitting? Did you get really close at any stage?
I never got close to quitting. I had, in my inner thighs on both sides, I had probably, I don't know, maybe a 1/4-inch diameter holes right through my skin and into the muscle tissue from life jacket straps that had been sawing back and forth. And a lot of other guys had it. And every time we go in the ocean, the salt water would go in there. Every time we rolled around on the beach, the sand would go in there. And there would be medical breaks. And so I think it was on the third day, I shuffled into line, and there was about 10 guys in front of me, and we're getting ready to go in to see the medic. And the second from the first guy in line was close enough to hear what was going on in the medical office. And he all of a sudden breaks out of the line and starts shuffling back. And as he's shuffling back, he says, "It's a trick. It's a trick. It's a trick. If you go in there, they take you out of the class. You're done." And so all of us just kind of slowly turned. We just shuffled right behind him, right out of the gate. We never even went in there to find out if they could do something about whatever our owies were. So it wasn't really, I didn't think I was quitting, but it turned out I was in a line of people that were going to be declared quitters, and I turned right around. So,
and so that was for real. You would have been discharged from it if you.
Yeah, they would do back then. They would do stuff like that. They don't do that anymore, but they didn't need a lot of SEALs at the time. They didn't need very many. There's only 2 SEAL teams back then, a total of about 200 in the entire United States Navy. There was no push for it. They only had 3 of those training classes a year, and they would drop people, for little things, for anything. And I mean, I saw in one evolution, the ambulance was actually backed up. It was about 3:00 in the morning, and it was really cold. We were out there just in swim trunks, freezing. And we had just finished this training evolution in a swim pool that was outside.
Yeah.
And the medic opened up the back of the ambulance, and he'd had the heater turned on to the maximum amount in the ambulance. You could actually feel the heat coming out of the ambulance. And he just stood there and says, anybody, feel like they're getting too cold or whatever, you can go ahead and just get in the ambulance. And we're not going to be leaving for a little while. And then he wandered off. 2 guys got into the ambulance and immediately went to sleep, because, when you're that tired, and you're freezing, it's 2:00 in the morning, all you need is that warmth and you're done. He came back a couple minutes later, slowly closed the doors, shut the little handle on it, looked at us, smiled, got in the driver's seat, and drove away. And we never saw him again.
Wow.
Yeah. By the time I became an instructor, you couldn't do that. You had to document everything, and you were supposed to talk to everybody. That's why the psychology is so clear to me. Yeah. When I came back as an instructor, you were supposed to have a conversation with the person that said they wanted to quit, and listen to what their reason was, and then not encourage them, but try to question their logic a little bit. And sometimes you just say, "Yeah, whatever, get back with your class," and they just go, "Ooh," and they turn around, and maybe they would never do it again. But most of them would find another way, another instructor, or 2 evolutions later in the day, they'd quit. So Yeah.
So tell me, like looking back, did you sort of feel there's any correlation in the type of people that were getting through, and in particular, like those that were really passionate about doing it, were they more likely to succeed, do you think, or in fact was it the opposite? I mean, do you think there was any connection at all between those that were really passionate about it and getting through, and those that were kind of a bit more ambivalent about it?
I think it depends on whether the passion was genuine or not. There's a lot of showboating about that in the beginning. A lot of chest thumping, and I want to be a warrior. I'm a winner. I can bench press 300 pounds. I got a black belt. I'm gonna eat this course up and all that. And like I told you before, I was impressed. I'm like, oh wow, that guy's got a lot going for him. But the guy who was sharpening his knife, he made it through. But his passion was more fear of failure in the face of his father, and he had this grudge and this thing to prove to his dad, and that's what got him through. I mean, I think they would have had to kill him to stop him, because he was not going to not finish that course. So there's kind of the genuine passion, and then there's the showboat type. And the genuine passion, obviously the showboat, you see it. It's part of the atmospherics of the person's personality. As instructors, you can see that in 10 seconds and see through it, even faster. The deeper passion, unless somebody told you what their motivation was, like that guy with the knife, no, you wouldn't know. But you could see as an instructor, you could see it in their eyes. And I never really tried to study my fellow students, so I don't remember looking at everybody and saying, oh yeah, he's going to make it, he's not going to make it. But once I got there as an instructor, we all kind of made bets on who was in, who was out. And you knew by about the third or fourth day, because you can see somebody, the intensity in their eyes, and they can't fake that. They may say certain words, but if their eyes look like they're lost souls and they're scared and they're worried. Yeah. And so that's a part of it. I think the thing I told you before about the experience in life prior to the course, if you had anything that would strengthen your psychological resilience, a lot of SEALs came from divorced families, and that seemed to be a theme. Those that weren't from divorced families seemed to come from families that really fostered independent thinking and independence and individual decision making, so that even as teenagers, they weren't leaning on everybody else to make the call for them. So they had a little bit of individualism, and they were self-starters, and they were self-motivated, even though they came from a family that wasn't broken or anything. I think those are probably the two most consistent things I noticed all the time. And sometimes you don't know it, and then you work with guys later in the SEAL teams, and you find out that's their backstory, and you're like, okay, well, that fits.
Yeah, makes sense. So what were the qualities, and I think you've just touched on a lot of them, but what were the qualities that are looked for in a successful graduate from Navy SEAL training?
Well, you will have those successful qualities at the end of the 9 weeks, the first 9 weeks.
Yeah.
They don't spend any time, they don't waste any effort teaching you anything.
Yeah.
Right. They wait until you've gone through the first 5 weeks, and then you go through Hell Week, which is the 5 days of no sleep and constant movement, etc. Usually about half the class is gone or more by the time Hell Week starts. You lose the other half of the class in Hell Week. Usually by Wednesday night. Nobody quits after Wednesday night. You pretty much got who you're going to have for the rest of the 6 months, unless they get hurt. And if they get hurt, they get pulled out, they get repaired. If they've made it past that Hell Week, they get reinserted in the class after Hell Week. Because after Hell Week, you have a week of recuperation. Then you go into not advanced, but you go into dive training, basic scuba training. You learn the basics of how to attack ships underwater.
Yeah.
And so now you're a student and you're learning. It's less about beating you up. It's less about testing your mettle or anything like that. And the last phase is all ground combat skills, those infantry things I was telling you about that the Navy didn't have. You're learning basic infantry skills, basic weapons, demolitions, and a little bit of military leadership and combat patrols and things, not too much. So when you graduate, you've already spent the last 18 weeks as a known quantity that's been selected through the first 9 weeks, and you're being slowly through the basic process evaluated. And then if there's something that you're weak in, they try to help you get stronger in it. So it's not really about trying to get you out. They don't want to
Yeah.
get you out because now you're a valuable thing. You're somebody that made it through that 9 weeks, and that person is very valuable to the United States Navy. When it's all said and done, by the time they get to the end of the 2 years, it's about $2 million invested per SEAL.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of SEALs compared to most military units, but yeah, and it's more expensive now than when I went through, but there's so much more technical training and there's so many more missions that require so many other skills, and so you're in a constant state of learning and training. And you go to locksmith school, and you go to high speed dynamic driving school, like you're going to be a racing car driver, and then you go to glacier climbing school. I mean, it never ends. So you're in a constant state of trying to get apprentice, journeyman, master level capabilities in all these different little facets. So it's more expensive nowadays.
So in terms of qualities of the people, though, that make an ideal Navy SEAL, I guess kind of what I'm hearing of things are obviously going to be mentally really tough.
Yeah.
You've got to be an independent thinker, be able to think outside of the box. I would imagine teamwork's really important, that you've got to be working as a team rather than an individual and going and doing your own thing. Can you kind of summarize for me?
Yeah. So there's a saying now that's it's not about I, it's about we. And that's something that may or may not be absorbed by the student going through the basic course, because a lot of the metrics in the basic course are focused on the individual. It's, how fast do you run? There's lots of tests and lots of things and scores and stuff you have to maintain, standards. And so what they try to do in the intermediate course is really pound in that you're no longer just you, and you're no longer just you with 5 guys just trying to survive. Now you're a team. You're a team of equals, and you know what your strengths and weaknesses are. You basically get to a point where just by somebody's body language what they're thinking. And this is obviously part of patrol tactics at night. You can tell if somebody suddenly hears something, senses something, and the entire patrol will freeze because one guy tilted his head a little way. And that's the way he always does when he's worried, because you've worked so much together. You're that in sync with each other, physically, psychologically, emotionally. You're committed to the greater objective, but not mindlessly. You're selected with there's a very high IQ requirement to get into SEAL teams. That's part of the reason why you go from 500 to 125 to get in the class.
Right.
And that IQ is also, it's an emotional IQ. It's pure intellectual capacity to think critically. And it's also the agile, creative mindset, the willingness to try to solve a problem and to look and turn that problem 360 degrees and look at it from different aspects, and also seek other insights and ideas. I mean, that's essentially a lot of what conveys, from what I did in the SEAL teams to what I did in business and what I talked about in the book, because you end up working with a group of guys that get in a room and you brainstorm every mission, and then you go out and rehearse it, and then you go back and you tweak it. And then if it's time to go, you go. And I'm here to tell you that 4 or 5 times out of 10, when you get there, something's wrong, something's completely different. And you just basically, you play a pickup game. You basically sit down in a huddle, you go left, you go right, you go down the center, you 2 guys stand back, watch this, go. And then, so you have to improvise in the moment, but still to a smart standard of tactical thinking and execution. And everybody has to roll with that. They have to be good leaders, good followers. I mean, that's those are a lot of attributes. Some of them are natural to the selection process. Some of them have to be honed and groomed by that following 1.5 years of training. And some of it has to be beaten out of some people because they're too obstinate to think the way they need to think. But the most difficult thing, I was an enlisted guy for 10 years, and then I was an officer for 10 years in the SEAL team. So I knew what it was like to work under great officers and crappy officers. And then, when I became an officer, I was like, okay, I don't want to be one of the crappy officers. I want to emulate one of the good officers. But I really didn't understand how difficult it was for an officer, because enlisted SEALs are allowed to vent their opinions. Their opinions are valuable. They're experts in lots of things. The officers will never be experts in everything the enlisted guys are experts in.
Yeah.
So that firestorm of ideas and debate, as an enlisted guy, you feel like it's your right and it's your voice, and that's great. When you're on the other side and you're the officer and you've got this, madhouse where nobody's decided, nobody can agree, you got to manage all that. It's like being in an art company with a bunch of creatives trying to design something, and they're all adamantly sure that they're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I told somebody, it's like you try to lead 14 Napoleons. Every one of them thinks they can do your job better than you, and they might be right about that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's an interesting dynamic leading SEALs, but you also get to see why it's such a powerful thing to have that much brain power and that much ingenuity applied to special missions.
And just to clarify the difference with the regular services, from what I understand, the traditional services, the army of that, they don't encourage that level of independent thinking and expressing of opinions. You just got to follow orders, whether it be from an officer or from a sergeant. Is that the case? So that the SEALs are really encouraging a lot more vocal opinions from the enlisted men?
Apparently, this has been a tradition in Navy special operations going back to World War II. I just finished a book that went all the way back, and that freewheeling kind of spirit, allowing everybody to speak their mind and all that, seems to be a tradition. But like you said, it's not a tradition in conventional military units. Doesn't matter what the service is, but there's a lot more of that freedom in special forces units. It's maybe not as crazy and freewheeling as the SEAL teams. Depends on the leader. Some leaders will encourage that. They have the same kind of pedigree, the same kind of DNA. You've got extremely intelligent people in the room, and it would be dumb not to leverage all that intelligence. And when you tack onto that all the experience, you have 10 Army Special Forces guys, and each of them have 5 years. That's 50 years of experience.
Yeah.
Why would you order them to do anything? I'd just give them a dry erase pen and say, we need to go get Bob the bad guy. I'll be back in 10 minutes. You can tell me how you think we should do it. I mean, that's how I would leverage that kind of brain power. And I think most special unit leaders are smart enough to do that.
So I know it's appropriate to kind of segue into the business world, but I can't let go of knowing a bit more about your military history before we get there. So I'm gonna resist it because I need to ask some more questions there. But because one of the things I really want to talk about is the connection between what you learned in the military and how that has had relevance in business. But I can't go there yet. I've got to know more. So what I want to know now is about you transitioning from enlisted to an officer. How did that come about?
Well, at least at the time, and starting probably in 1968, and most of the special ops kind of think the same way. So let's say back in those days, it cost $500,000 to train a SEAL.
Yeah.
And so they go, and enlisted SEAL goes and does 3 combat tours in Vietnam. And in a small unit, everybody ends up leading at some point. And they've shown that they're pretty good leaders, and they're definitely good SEALs. And they've stood up in combat. They thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could make these guys officers? Because then we basically captured their combat experience, their demonstrated leadership, and then we put them on top of the next group that's going to Vietnam or the next group that's going to someplace else. And so they created a program in the late 60s that encouraged SEAL enlisted guys at a certain rank level to become officers. And there were a lot of different ways to do it. The coolest way was they just sent you to a college for 4 years. You had to grow your hair long, drink, party. And when you graduated, you went to officers candidate school, which is only 4 months long, learned how to salute and all that stuff again. And then you were an officer. The one I went through was a program where, you have to have a college degree to be an officer in the U.S. military. Yeah. So I had a college degree that I'd worked on in my first 8-9 years when I was in the SEAL teams, and there were about, I think there were 3 slots that year to go to officers candidate school if you were a SEAL enlisted guy.
Yeah.
So we had about 15 applied for it, and then there's a board, and so basically they were going to pick 3 out of the 15, and so I got picked, and I went to officers candidate school, and
Wow.
so I went from being a senior enlisted SEAL to I was two ranks below the top enlisted rank you could get to becoming the lowest possible rank as an officer. So I went from like, somebody that should be a know-it-all to somebody should just shut up because nobody's going to ask him a question anyway. And but what that does is it puts a kind of an experience, deep experience foundation in the group of officers, because the other officers also they don't lose face by going next door to the guy that was, like me, 10 years an enlisted guy, and now I'm an officer and he can come over and ask me questions. Maybe they're having questions, difficulty handling the enlisted guys they're leading. Well, heck, I could tell them, well, maybe you're being too hard on them. Maybe you're being too soft on them. Maybe you're not giving them enough of an opportunity to express themselves. Maybe you're giving them too much of an opportunity, all that kind of stuff. And so they always saw there was value. So the program goes on to this day.
Right. And so for you, what I'm interested to know too is like, how was that, the transition between, being enlisted to then being an officer? How hard did you find that to transition into the new role?
In a lot of ways, it was really easy because nobody expected anything of me. And that's a strange thing to say because the people around me at my first SEAL team as an officer knew that I had spent 10 years, that I was a chief petty officer. So they knew I was experienced in everything, but a lot of the jobs and assignments and the tasks for officers were handed out based on the rank of the officer. So if I'm an ensign and the job is for a lieutenant, which would be equivalent of a captain in the Army, and they would give that job to the lieutenant. They wouldn't give it to an ensign. So I was underutilized for a while. And then we got a commanding officer who said, wait a minute, I don't care. I don't care if this should be a lieutenant. I know this guy, I'm sending him. So suddenly I'm getting sent everywhere. So I went from a short period of underutilization to all of a sudden hyperutilization, because even if they sent a lieutenant, that lieutenant would have only had 3 or 4 years in the SEAL community. And, I had more than that. So they were sending a more experienced guy if they sent me. And they still got credit for sending an officer if whoever was going to talk to me needed to talk to an officer. So, it flipped after about 6 or 7 months. Suddenly I was in high demand. And then it was kind of fun because I could go to a conference filled with Marines or Army guys, whatever. They'd take one glance at my rank insignia, and they'd actually talk in front of me like, well, he's an idiot. He's not going to know what the hell we're talking about. And I thought, okay, this is fun. I can just eavesdrop. I can wander around. And then every so often when I was in a conference or I was in a brainstorming session, whatever, when I did say something, everybody looked at me like, holy crap, did you hear what that guy just said? The ensign just came up with a great idea, because I was supposed to be a brand new dude.
Yeah.
And if they didn't know me, that's what they thought I was. So.
Right. They didn't know you had 10 years of experience.
No. And I looked, when I joined the SEALs, I looked like I was 14. And when I became an officer, I looked like I was about 20. And so, my DNA made me look the part. And so I didn't have any problems with the transition. And by a long shot, the tactics, the tactical leadership was very, very easy, because I'd been training officers to do that job. I mean, that's what you do as an enlisted. You train the officers how to do their job. So yeah, it was actually a lot of fun. It wasn't until the end of that 10 years as an officer when I realized, well, I'm getting to the point now where I'm too senior and they're going to put me on staffs, and I'm never going to be on missions. I'm never going to do any of that kind of work ever again.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I'm going to go from, being on the sports team on the field playing to being in, administration and management or something. And that's why ultimately that's why I decided to retire at 20. I had a great run. So
yeah, that's at 20 years, by the way, just to clarify, not 20 years old.
Yeah, 20 years, 20 years. Yeah.
So just before we get on to the next stage, in terms of combat, can you tell us just a little bit about kind of what sort of combat you saw? Whereabouts?
So there's a couple of different kinds of quote unquote combat. So there's missions that aren't associated with wars. They're always classified. And if you're a SEAL, for the most part, you don't want there to be any shooting, because your job is to sneak around, sneak in, sneak out, do whatever you're supposed to do. You're not really supposed to go in guns blazing and do assaults and stuff like that. There's other units that do that. So I was involved in some of those, and then I was involved in the invasion of Panama. Both before the invasion, we had things that we were doing down there, and then during the invasion, and all in there, I had 31 combat missions as an officer. And then I spent some time in Iraq in a different capacity, which actually I got shot at and mortared and rocketed more there. And that's the advantage. I mean, that's the movies show all these high speed, cool guys and stuff, but the harder job is the regular conventional military, the infantry, because everybody knows you're coming. Everybody knows what you're going to do. You're going to try to take and hold the hill or the bridge. There's very little surprise, and they pretty much know what your tactics are going to be, because to take the bridge or the hill, you have to do it a certain way. And that means if you're going to take the bridge or the hill, the bad guys can just take all their artillery and dial it into the hill or the bridge and wait and just let you take it, and then just bomb the hell out of you, right?
Blow you
With
up.
SEALs are special forces, special operations guys. You're basically using guile and intelligence, and if you have to, surprise, but more you want to be real subtle, and you want to be ninja. You want to sneak in, sneak out, and nobody knows who the hell was there. The sun comes up and they're looking around, and hey, where's Abdul, or where's Phil? He's just gone, right? In Vietnam, when they did that, the Viet Cong put a price on their heads, but they didn't know much about them. So they gave them there's a Vietnamese name, I can't remember how to pronounce it, but it meant men with green faces. They were like ghosts. They terrified these guys, because SEALs went out at night. Most of the Army and Marine Corps didn't go out at night. So at night, the Viet Cong could run up and down trails all they wanted, but they kept getting snatched off the trails or out of their huts in the middle of the night while they're sleeping. And, that was kind of the tradition of SEAL operations, and it still is. So most SEAL operations are not big shoot 'em up, Bin Laden type things.
And so for you though, did you ever worry about, the possibility of losing your life? Has that ever played on your mind at all, or you just kind of went with it and didn't really give it too much thought?
Only once, and part of it's whether you have control over the circumstances, because the more control you have, the more confidence you have that you probably can figure something out, right? In a fight, in a gunfight, you take somebody in the special operations community that's got 10, 20,000 rounds down each of the different weapon systems, and they've been trained to this high caliber of precision shooting and the speed of your shooting, and it's basically not fair. I mean, somebody walks around a corner with a rifle and they go, "Hey," and they've already got 2 rounds in their head. It's just
Wow.
Those kinds of engagements you feel extremely comfortable and competent in dealing with. In my case, it was in a helicopter, and I was taking in a relief force, and then we had 2 helicopters, and I was in a Black Hawk helicopter, and we're in the lead helicopter, and ground fire started coming up, and I don't think it was heavy anti-aircraft type fire, because we heard the sound of, it sounded like BBs being shot or rocks being thrown at like tin or metal, right? It's like ting, 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 ting. And it didn't register. I could see tracer fire on the other side of either the door and everything, but it didn't register that the ting, ting, ting sound was the helicopter I was getting hit. And then I had a toggle switch on my headset, so I could talk to my team on a TACnet. I could talk to the guys we were going to on the ground, or I could flip it and talk to the pilot and co-pilot. And so I flipped it to talk to the pilot and co-pilot to find out how much time till we got to the place we were going to land. And all I heard was these 2 guys screaming and yelling about ground fire, and they lost the bird that was following us. That
Oh,
bird,
wow.
it was at night, and that bird peeled off over a
Yeah.
city. And so now we have two loose elements over a city. And
Yeah.
I realized that I put the tracer fire and the rocks hitting metal sounds together. And in that moment, I went, oh crap. Because now you can't cool guy your way out of it. I mean, if they shoot the helicopter down, you're just going down.
Yeah.
And that was probably the only time there was a sense of helplessness. I actually thought about my kids, and I did a little prayer message to them and everything, because I'm like, if the next thing hits and knocks this thing out of the air, that's it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
can't
it's
say,
out of your control.
I can't save my guys. I can't save myself. And so ultimately what I did was I told the guys there was a hotel down the coast I could see with this green marquee, like a 20-story high hotel. I said, tell the guys to come out to the coast, follow the coast to the hotel with the green thing. You guys go there and orbit, and we'll link up there. Then we'll drop to the coast and come back in and go to where we're going. And that's what we ultimately did. So,
Yeah.
and the helicopter supposedly came back and had 20 something bullet holes in it. And the pilot and co-pilot got big medals from the Air Force for flying us in. Yeah. So
Wow.
that's always I think that for professional military guys, that's always the scariest situation, where you're not in the situation that you were trained to deal with,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you have control over the circumstances, or at least you're the dominant player in that situation.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just talk about your retirement now, as much as I like to keep talking about that. So you're finishing in the armed services. What's your prospects at that point? You've been in the military all this time. What are you thinking that you are going to be able to do when you go out into the business world?
So I had an undergraduate degree in business, and while I was an officer, I was able to get a master's degree in business management.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a lawyer. So
Wow. In
the United States, there's a test you have to take, and then depending on your score, you shop that around to law schools. And I was in the process. I had already taken the test. I had a pretty good score. I was starting to shop it around, and another SEAL that had retired, who was working in the financial services industry, came into our SEAL building, talked to my commanding officer, asked how I was doing, heard that I was going to get ready to go to law school, came into my office, grabbed me, says, we're going to lunch. And then he spent an hour talking me out of law school and talking me into the financial services industry. He goes, you can do the same thing. You can put a shingle up. You can be your own man. You can kind of pick your path, but you don't have to go through 3 more years of school. And at the time, there was the company he was working for, the founder's son, I actually put through SEAL training. So
oh, wow.
This guy was willing to hire any SEAL sight unseen and then train you after the fact. That's kind of nice, right? Because he figured we were a known quantity as far as dependability and work ethic and all that. And so I had that in my back pocket, but once he convinced me, I decided to study a couple of other companies, and ultimately I ended up not going with that company, but I went with another company in the same city of Baltimore. And so I joined them. I spent about 2.5 years with them, built the business pretty fast. It was mostly, selling myself to strangers, try to convince them to give me their life savings. And then hopefully I didn't lose it in the market as I was building up their portfolio. And then United Bank of Switzerland recruited me to leave and go set up with them. And I had some conditions. I wanted to try to manage money and not spend all day talking to clients. So they set up a boutique operation for me. I hired a couple of people to help me, and now I was going to become a true portfolio manager. They had a thing you had to go through to become designated and all that. So I could create a mutual fund essentially if I wanted to, or just a controlled stock portfolio. And so all in between the first place and UBS, I ended up 7.5 years doing that work. And so kind of a sloppy segue. It wasn't exactly what I thought I was going to do for the last 1.5 years before I retired, but it worked out.
So tell me though, like what do you think is the perception of the business community when someone such as yourself comes out of the military. Is that seen in any way as a positive? And particularly, I suppose, being a Navy SEAL, does that make any difference at all? Or, I mean, obviously did in that one example you gave me because their son had been a SEAL, so they have that inside knowledge. But for the general business community, how do you think people would receive you when you're coming out of the military like that?
It's different now than it was then. So back then, it was before 9/11. There was one movie in the United States about the SEALs with actor Charlie Sheen and some others. And that's about all the public knew about SEALs still.
Yeah.
The SEAL teams try to keep a little bit of a low key, even though that movie screenplay was written by a SEAL. So unless you saw that movie, you still didn't really know anything about it. You get a general kind of appreciation for, having served, but no more than if you'd been, in any other service, if you'd been a Marine or in the Air Force, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I really didn't have any kind of advantage there. Nowadays, there's so much out there about SEALs. There's actually, like a level 8 celebrity status. People get excited when you walk into the room. They want to know all about you. They want to talk to you and everything. And it doesn't matter when you were a SEAL, just the fact that you were a SEAL. It's just, it's like being an astronaut or something. They just assume that that's cool and special, and they want to, talk to you. But I've also heard from guys nowadays that might get you an interview, that might get you a free meal and a beer.
Yeah.
But at the end of all that, if you don't have any skills that translate, then you probably won't get the job. So a lot of SEALs end up starting their own businesses because then they can be their own boss and they can take all those characteristics we talked about earlier and apply them, to their whatever their chosen line of business is going to be. Some decide to go back to school and get a professional skill of some sort, and then they come back in. Now they're a SEAL with a engineering degree or with something. A few go back into work for the government, and a few go into work for companies that are doing government work. So that's kind of like the mix nowadays. When I did it, nobody really knew, nobody really cared. Now, I'll tell you that if I walked into a room of people that were 70 years old or older, and I said I was a Navy frogman, drinks were on them. I didn't have to buy a drink. I didn't have to do anything because they were very, very, World War II era type patriotic people.
Yeah.
Then you see like a visceral reaction, like that. And that's what the guys are getting today. I only got that in that kind of a situation.
And so tell me, like we're sort of touching on it before, and you've written a book about it, really. But what are some of the qualities in a SEAL that transcend business and are really, beneficial in the business world? Can you kind of talk to me about, some of those qualities in the SEALs and how that can actually be to their advantage when they get into the business world?
Sure. So every single character trait that we were discussing that makes a good SEAL, all of those are applicable and are also appreciated in the commercial sector, in government, everywhere else, right? Everybody can appreciate confident people, motivated people, people with great work ethic, people that care about everybody around them, that care about the team doing well, the mission being performed. Some of the other things are more along the lines of the intellectual, the IQ, the emotional IQ, the intellectual humility. So the emotional IQ has a lot to do with the maturity of how you handle situations. Usually it is expressed or it reveals itself in stressful situations. So in a room of 10 people, if you've got a SEAL standing there and all of a sudden something really stressful happens, you're going to have 9 different reactions, and the SEAL is going to react calmly and be poised, and he's not going to be emotional about it. Doesn't mean he's not an emotional person or that he doesn't have emotions, but he has a maturity about it in that he knows it's not going to help solve the problem, whatever the stress was generated by. Then you have intellectual humility. And I almost called the book Be Humble because I talk a lot about this in the book. Intellectual humility allows you to clear all the psychological baggage that you carry around out of your mind before you address
Yeah.
a problem or a challenge. So, and it can be good or bad baggage. So if you've been doing great in your business, you've been doing great, whatever your vocation is, you've been getting accolades, maybe you get raises and bonuses, etc. Maybe you got a trophy for being a great athlete,
Yeah.
and or you just finished a really bad long divorce, or you just broke up with a girlfriend. Um, you tried to buy the house that you wanted, you can't, it fell through. So good things and bad things. You carry that with you, right? And that's a choice.
Sure.
And that's a
Yeah.
choice. And if I show up at work and somebody says, "Hey, we got a problem to solve," and I start to listen to them, if I'm on the winner streak, then I've got a very arrogant, leaning perspective. Oh, I know how to solve this. I've been solving everything great, and I've been using this way to solve it. And I'm going to say, here's my 3 questions that are tunnel visioned into exactly what my history, my past tells me will be successful.
Yeah.
I'm not going to listen to any other input. And that may work once in a while, but at some point you're going to miss it because something new is going on. The world's changing. Your competitors did something you didn't anticipate. So, and the other thing is when you don't think you can make a good call, when you're so concerned about your track record, you become reluctant. You can't have any confidence. You don't want to make a decision. You keep punting and pushing the decision, or you try to get somebody else to make the decision or the group to make the decision. So you have to get rid of all that. You have to basically just become humble intellectually, and that clears the decks for you to be able to have intellectual curiosity. And intellectual curiosity is opening your mind to all the possibilities, all the information, all the inputs, all the ideas from any wacky source possible, so that you can then do the last step, which is to be intellectually creative.
Yeah.
And that, in essence, is essentially you have to have the humility to set you up for the other two, and the combination of those 3 give you that nimbleness, that agility, that flexibility. And it also means that you're always upping your game and you're always preparing to win based on what's in front of you and the data set and the facts that are in front of you, instead of trying to mush everything into some pattern from the past.
Yeah, I mean, just listening to that, you can just sort of see in the sort of the military environment, you're needing that clarity of thought, and you're out there in the environment, and you've got to solve a problem. Things are happening, unfolding in a way that you weren't expecting, and then you're going to make a decision then, and as to how you're going to deal with it. The question I guess I have from that though is, okay, you learn that in the SEALs, which hugely beneficial in my opinion out in the business world, but to what extent is it easy to hold on to that? Or when you get out in the business world, is it easy to be corrupted, forget about what you learnt in the SEALs and that environment, and actually just end up becoming like everybody else and making the same mistakes? Is that much of a problem, do you think?
No, because you are you're already hardwired for probably 80% of everything I just said by the fact that you were selected. You were selected because you're kind of that person already.
Right.
So that's your core personality. That's your core belief system. Then it's reinforced and supercharged over the next X number of years that you're a SEAL. You see umpteen examples of it being right and correct and being the proper way. In the military, there's a hard lesson that's learned all the time. There may be a pattern that works tactically, and you repeat it, repeat it until the bad guys figure out your pattern. Then they're waiting for you. Then they kill you.
Yeah.
So it worked 10 times. The 11th time they killed you. So just repeating a pattern because it worked doesn't mean that's the right pattern. And those lessons are burned into your brain. You're already kind of willing to accept it because of the kind of person you are. So what happens is, frustration wise for guys, and any elite special forces guys would be the same way, is their loyalty. Their loyalty is very, very high, both to the people around them, to the people that might be reporting to them, to the people they're reporting to, and to the organization as a whole. They're very mission focused, not in a blind way, but in a very creative, intellectual way. And it's hard to see people that don't think that way, not care, not put in as much effort, take long lunches, take a vacation for 5 days right in the middle of the crisis of, closing something up and making it happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you're almost looking at it like they're a different kind of animal. How could you even be that way? You're letting everybody down, and everybody else has to work twice as hard because you stepped out. You left. And they say, well, I deserve a vacation. I can have a vacation 3 times a year. See ya. Different mindset, right?
Yeah,
Completely different mindset.
Totally different.
So it's not an evil mindset. It's the mindset that's cultivated in normal the commercial world, right? It's not they're not life and death decisions unless you work in an ER emergency room or something, or a hospital. And the frustration in the early years for all of us kind of fades, and you realize, okay, it isn't the SEAL teams. They didn't spend $2 million per person working for me. They're just regular folks. They're just there and they're trying to pay their bills. They're not there to try to change the world or defeat evil or anything. And so you have to figure out, what are you going to do next? And that, in the book, I talk a lot about that. You have to figure out a better way to select talent so that they're more of a cultural fit, at least leaning into more of a, give a hell kind of point of view, instead of it's all about me and I can leave whenever I want. You have to train and coach and mentor those people, just like we were trained and coached and mentored in the SEAL teams to get to a kind of a high level of that kind of thinking. And then you got to cross train and create bench strength and capabilities so that if somebody wants to take a vacation, the whole place doesn't collapse. That single point of failure, you have to manage, and you have to design the organization to eliminate that. And then the team's stronger, and anybody in the team can either get sick, can quit, go on vacation, and the whole thing doesn't, fall apart. And those are things you figure out. Okay, that's how you cope in the commercial world.
Yeah.
You try to find the right people. You hope you get the right people. You create a culture where everybody cares about everybody, and the leader cares about everybody. Then you train and coach the heck out of them and create that redundancy so that people can live a life but still have a commitment.
And so for you, a hard question, I guess, but if you hadn't had your military experience, how different do you think you would have been as a business person if you hadn't had that background first, that grounding?
I don't think I would have been a business person. I think I would have gravitated towards teaching, or I would have probably gravitated towards teaching. I loved history. And archaeology. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be an archaeologist. I also wanted to be a writer, but it was more about that than trying to be in the military, or I don't think I ever gave a thought to trying to be in business when I was growing up, ever. So I wouldn't have been in this. I wouldn't have been in business, I don't think.
Yeah. It's just remarkable. And it's interesting listening to you talk before, when you're talking about becoming a officer, and how you were like, okay, well, I'll go, I might be going out of the room. You guys work out what we're going to do, and I'm going to come back and we're going to sort it out. I mean, that to me spoke a lot in terms of volumes of a leadership approach, that inclusive approach, respecting the skills and knowledge of all the other team and coming together to solve it, rather than what you can see is leadership by people that think it's a dictatorship. It's just they have to have all the answers, and they're going to say, right, okay, this is what we're doing, without being inclusive of all the team members. So, to me, that really stood out, I guess, in terms of, I guess, having an approach which would be conducive to success in the business world.
But here's another spin on that, and I've used it both in the military and business. You get those 10 people with 5 years experience each, right, in the room.
Yeah.
And you say, here's the problem. I'll be back in a little while.
Yeah.
If they aren't practicing intellectual humility, you're going to get some variation of what they've been doing for the last 50 years. Okay. So in another room, you could have all the junior guys that have only been there for a year.
Yeah.
And you give them the same challenge, and you say the same thing, and you walk away. And you go into either room and you listen to what everybody has to say, because those newer guys will never, in normal units, and definitely not in commercial business, the new people right out of college, whatever, aren't going to sit there and argue or undercut what some older tenured senior person says in a room.
Yeah.
It's human nature to be I guess the situational awareness, of the architecture and the power structure and all that, you're not going to get an open give and take of ideas. Now, in the SEAL teams, we did, but you find that when you get people in a room that they're experienced, you put other people in that aren't not experienced, the experienced people tend to bulldoze over,
Yeah.
right? So if you
Yeah.
want to get some fresh, crazy, out of the box ideas,
Yeah.
you go ask a bunch of young guys. The other thing you can do is you go and you find people that have nothing to do with your company or business, and you ask 10 people the same question, and you just shut up and listen. So now you've got something outside of your environment. You've got the old guards, all the experience telling what they think, and then you've got the new guys. And that's a good kind of 360 way. This is where
Yeah.
this is the intellectual curiosity part. Curiosity allows you to ask the question and wait and see what happens because you don't know yet,
Yeah.
But once you get all that input, now you can be creative. It may be a hybrid of all of it. It may be that the outside, purely objective sources are going to tell you something that nobody inside would tell you because it's going to completely organize the company, and nobody would ever want that or say that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that happens a lot. I don't want to change anything. I don't want to change even the furniture. So nothing that has anything to do with that can be in my solution. It's already off the table. Well, if you talk to somebody outside, they don't care about job titles and who's got what chair or what officer sitting in, so they're going to give you a point blank response to the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you got to try all that stuff, and it's easier if you cross train everybody. It's easier if you mentor and train everybody to solve problems that way, and that they know and they trust you that that's the way you're going to do it.
Yeah.
You're going to use that process over and over and over again. They're not going to be belittled. They're not going to be fired. They're not going to be laughed at by senior leadership. And it takes a while for them to get comfortable with that and actually feel like that's true. And then when they do, there's respect, but there's also they feel you respect them, and you're not gonna do any of those negative things. So then it opens up their bandwidth and their minds, and sometimes even the older guys start to loosen up a little bit.
So, okay, so for you now, what's your mission? What's your thing that you're doing now? You've written this book. So what's your mission for the future? What's your plans?
Yeah, so I'm also a novelist. So I've got 8 published novels.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and if you go to martystrongbenimble.com, my business books are there. My 2 business books, Be Nimble and Be Visionary, which Be Visionary is coming out at the end of this year. And then I have 2 series of novels. You can also get access there. One is a time travel series. It's a 4-book series. And the other one is about a young SEAL officer over the course of his career, even after he's medically discharged. So I just finished the 5th book in that series Saturday. So it's coming out.
No, sorry, Kara. You, Kara.
No, it's coming out this June 30th. But so all my novels, I donate all the proceeds, all the royalties of my novels to the SEAL Veterans Foundation, which focuses on post-traumatic stress syndrome and all that stuff. And then my business books are basically part of a consulting practice and speaking practice that I'm building right now. Because I am a CEO and a chief strategy officer of a large enterprise that has 4 or 5 companies in it, predominantly split between healthcare and training. Yeah. And as a CEO, that's my day job. And as a CEO, at some point, I'm going to step away from that. I've been doing that for 13 years. At some point, I'm going to step away from that. So 2 years ago, I said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and think about what I want to do in the future and what would be a great life. And I like public speaking. I like writing, and I like consulting and mentoring and coaching. So I started that process, and the first step was to write Be Nimble. So, that's what I'm doing, kind of as the new life for Marty, which may be in a 12 months, 24 months, but it's building slowly, and it's going to be there. But every day, like prior to this interview, I'm on calls, and I'm running all these companies.
Wow, so busy man. So with your novel, with your one that's based on a Navy SEAL, to what extent have you drawn from your own experiences? And is there a degree of situations that you were in within that book, or is it very much all fiction?
The first two books are very much experiences that I had. But the lead character is actually the opposite of me. So I already told you what I was like. I was a 10-year
Yeah.
veteran SEAL when I became an officer, right? This guy's the normal kind of officer. He's coming right out of college. He's going to a 4-month officers candidate school. Then he's going through SEAL training, and he's showing up as a very junior guy that doesn't really know what's going on. So that's the protagonist. It's Matthew Barrett, and in book one, he's introduced, and he ends up going through the crucible of combat. And they're in different places around the planet, different places around the globe. Book two, he's a little bit more seasoned. He gets into another kind of a problem area, more counter narcotics and stuff. And then book three, he is discharged medically with, battle wounds and PTSD and stuff like that. And that book kind of starts out, he's in the bottle. He's basically on the edge of committing suicide and all that. And then he gets a call from somebody whose daughter was kidnapped. And the guy's an old SEAL friend, and the guy's distraught. And he's a paraplegic, so he can't do anything about it because the kidnapping happened in Hawaii. So the rest of that book is kind of this watching him revalidate his worth to himself, kind of crawl out of that low point. He's got a purpose again, and he's got a reason that's critical, and trying to find where she is, who took her, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And that reinvigorates him as a character, and the story's very much a redemption story. And then the next book after that, he's out of uniform. He's out of uniform at that point, obviously, but he's linking up with other guys that were in the SEAL teams with him, Army Special Forces captain, an FBI agent. They do something in the Basque Mountains and stuff, which I'm not going to talk about, because then you guys will know the story. And then this last one that I just finished is called Kandahar Moon. And first time I've ever really done this, I started it around the U.S. departure from Kabul abruptly.
Right.
It's there's an executive that's in Kabul, and the same main character is working for a kidnap and recovery firm, and they get a contract to go in and get her to the airport, get on her plane and all that, which seems pretty benign, except the day he gets there is the day that the suicide bomber, blows things up, shuts the airport down. And then, of course, the U.S. decides just to pull out right then. And so they're stranded. And so for the rest of the book, he's basically on the run, and he's got Iranians and ISIS, all kinds of people chasing him, and he's trying to survive. And he's got his little team of guys that came with him, and he's got the executive that he's dragging around trying to protect. So,
wow. I'm just wondering if this is going to be the new Jack Reacher, whether you could be onto a new version of Jack Reacher, maybe. It'd be great to have that success, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. I've actually decided to kind of put pen down at the end of this book, and for the rest of this year, I'm going to start working on movie treatments for both of the novel series, both for the time travel and the other, and spend a lot of time trying to shop those and get those out there, because I write in a very scenario driven style. People read, or even when they hear it on Audible, they think that it sounds like a movie. It feels like a movie. It's like they're watching a movie in their mind.
Oh, wow.
So it lends itself immediately to feeling like it could jump to the, to streaming content or something. So I haven't really pushed on it, and I think I'm going to for the next for the rest of this year, and then come up with a writing project next year again and go from there.
Well, I think one thing that can definitely be said about you is you've had a very interesting and diverse life so far. You've done a lot of different things, and certainly I can't imagine life being too boring for you, or it shouldn't be, with what all you've done. And you seem to be continuing to be very, very focused and getting out there and actually getting the job done. So a lot of people talk about writing books, but there's no fear for you there of not doing it. You've gone out and done it. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, the first one always feels like, it's Mount Kilimanjaro or something, but
Yeah.
after the first one, you kind of get into halfway through the first book, anybody will probably get into the mode, and the second half of the book will feel like it's kind of writing itself. And
Yeah.
then the next book is going to be more like, did I only have one book in me?
Yeah.
And then you just have to start actually just typing, and then
Yeah.
it starts to write itself sooner. And then you get over all that crap and you say, okay, I know how to write a book. And then you start, and most people that try to write, they get writer's block because they try to write and correct and edit and second guess as they're putting the words on the screen.
Right.
In reality, you should just have an idea what you want to write about and just start writing.
Right.
Get through a whole chapter and set it aside. And if you really have to go in and edit it right away, fine. But otherwise, go right into the next chapter. There's people that will take your money and they will edit it for you.
Yeah.
That have zero creativity, but are great but they're great at the technical side of
Yeah.
cleaning things up. If you're going to write, whether it's business or anything else, you're trying to get what your ideas are or what your imagination is conceiving
Yeah.
down, on the screen. And the inhibitor there is if you try to do that and self-edit and all that stuff at the same time. So, every time somebody asks me about that, I said, it's actually not that hard unless you make it hard by doing, what I just said. So.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good advice for me because I'm in the process. Well, I'm trying to write my first book. So it's good to hear from you and your insights into what to do. So I'm sure after the first one it'll get easier in that. But for me, I'm writing on something that's it's non-fiction. So it's very much about an event in my life and something that went down for quite a period of time. So I've got plenty of material that I need to convey. But you don't know how good a writer you're going to be, though. That's the thing. You think, okay, well, I can put this all down, but is anyone going to read it? I know my content. I've got a lot of pretty interesting stuff, but I don't know how good a writer I'm going to turn out to be. So
it's storytelling is more valuable than composition.
Right.
You go to school. Somebody once told me that if English teachers had figured this out and were right about the way to write, all English teachers would have, best-selling novels. They don't.
That's true.
What they don't know how to do is English teachers don't know story. They don't know how to either conceive a story from scratch, or if it's a personal experience, how to take that personal experience and lay it out as a story. So if you own the story and the story is a good story, and if it's unique or not unique, if it's a good story, you've got all you need.
Yeah.
You just have to trust that the story is going to carry itself. Get the story beginning to end. It's called stream of consciousness writing. You just start writing it. You don't get too overly organized with it, because sometimes the story takes off in different directions and it's the right thing to do. You don't want to jam it back into some preconceived pattern.
Yeah.
And then you set it aside, and in writing it's called let it season. Set it aside for a month. Then you come back and you reread it. And you may or may not want to tweak or change something or whatever. But then eventually get it to a point where you hand it to an editor. But I use beta readers. Have you heard of that term before?
No, I haven't.
You know what beta testing is?
Yep.
Okay.
Beta testing
It's exactly the same thing. So you're going to beta test your chapters. So I have science fiction fanatics that read chapter by chapter every science fiction book I wrote.
Right.
Same thing. I have guys that love action novels. Two of them that have read every single chapter by chapter as I was writing them. And I have a bunch of CEOs and business powerhouse guys that read every single chapter of Be Nimble and every single chapter of Be Visionary. I asked them if they would do it, and then I asked them if they would give me feedback. I'm not talking about spell check and edits. I'm talking about, you lost me, or this is really good. You should talk more about this particular thing. I wrote the second book because of a comment. One of the chapters in Be Nimble about strategy, he said, this could be a whole book. You should consider writing a whole book on this.
Wow.
So, and if you want to, you have to just tell them what you're looking for. I'm looking for an honest story, an emotional story, pure, honest story. I'm looking for a funny story. And then they'll tell you, hey, that last chapter wasn't so funny. You got real serious all of a sudden, Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah. Then you got to go back and maybe rewrite the chapter. I rewrote a lot, especially Be Nimble, because I kept sliding back into a technical academic kind of writing style. Part of it was defensive, because you think nobody's going to take you seriously unless you don't sound like a textbook. But the point of the book and the style of the book, which I had no problem writing for the second one, was to be a dialogue, kind of a person-to-person communication, like I was giving a mentoring session to somebody face-to-face. Yeah. And I did that for 3 chapters. And then the 4th chapter, I guess I went stilted. And the 3 guys that were reading it, all 3 said the same thing.
Wow,
what the hell happened? And I had to go back in and rewrite. I had to rewrite it, because it did. It sounded like I was writing a term paper for college or something. And so that's one way you can do it. And you'll get some good feedback, and that you're on track, off track, whatever. But
yeah, no, sounds good. Now, just finally to wrap this up, can you just sort of give your succinct sort of opinion on what do you think it takes? What is the difference between those that go out and succeed in life and those that don't? I mean, we've got the podcast that's got insights into success. So I'm kind of wanting your view on, and it doesn't have to be in business, but what do you think are some of the key defining points where, between those that go out and actually make things happen and those that don't?
I mean, some of these are going to sound cliche. First and foremost, the idea of we get knocked down, you got to get up. You got to get up and keep fighting. You have to get up and move forward and not dwell on the fact you got knocked down. Metaphorically, whatever getting knocked down means, whether it's a marriage that failed, you got fired from a business, you had a business that went bankrupt, you lost an arm in an accident, whatever that is, you have to just get back up and move forward. And if you don't do that, most of the bad things that happen to human beings happen. Psychologically, physical, you just start to fall apart. You start to crawl inside yourself. And then, that's really hard to correct once you go down that slope. The other one is, for some reason, I don't know how it is in New Zealand, but in the United States, there's this pattern that parents were taught by their parents, et cetera, that they teach their kids, that the only way you can succeed is you have to get good grades, and then you have to get good grades, and then you have to get into a university and get good grades, and then you're going to get a really good job.
Yeah.
And, oh, by the way, you're supposed to know what you want to do in the university and what you want to do in that job when you're about 14 years old.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of anxiety loaded on teenagers by their parents, because their parents have been taught this is the formula for success, right? Yeah. If you don't go to college, you're going to fail in life. If you don't go, if they think you should be a professional, like a lawyer or an accountant or an engineer, and you don't do that, you've just broken the formula, you're going to fail. And they tell their kids this. They actually tell them, if you don't do this, you're going to fail. So in our country, there's a massive, massive attrition in med school and law school in like the second year, because everybody gets in there and they realize they're living this formula that their parents had in their head that they drove down their throats to get them out the door. And it's not making them happy. It's not what they want to do. And then they go through all kinds of stress and distress, and they're letting everybody down and all that. It's just the wrong way, I think, to approach life. I think, looking back now, for sure, but I've given speeches to U.S. Naval Academy graduates that were in their late 30s and 40s talking about transition out of uniform, and I give them the same kind of pitch. When you were 17 and you were going to go to a 4-year college, how old were you going to be when you graduated from college? And they look at me kind of funny and they go, well, 21. Right. So if you're 40 and you go to a 4-year college, how old are you going to be when you graduate from 4-year college? All right. Well, 44. All right. How many years do you think you're going to live? Well, I don't know. All right. So let's say when you're 50, you decide to go to college for a totally different thing. How old are you going to be when you go and get your second degree in a completely different thing? Well, 54. Well, you're still not as old as me, dude. And now you've got 2 degrees, and that's after you spend an entire career in the military. And you can learn how to write software. You can learn how to be a sous chef. you can learn how to do anything you want
Yeah.
because you've got time, and it just depends on how you want to use that time. So for younger people, I say, kind of forget what everybody else told you want to be. That formula doesn't work anyway. And, go out there and search around and try a couple of things and see if you can find something that really interests you and kind of move that way, right? And then if it doesn't interest you after a while, do the same process to pick the next lane. There's nothing wrong with having 5-6 professions over the course of 50 working years, And that, I think, would give everybody, a feeling of freedom, and they wouldn't feel trapped in any particular lane. Like I've invested so much in this, I can never be anything else. I just got to stick with this to the day I retire. Yeah, so that's the second thing. If you get knocked down, get back up again, and ignore what everybody tells you about what the secret of success is or what the formula for success is. The formula for success is not getting knocked down, but if you get knocked down, stand back up and go in the direction that you want to go in and experience whatever's out there. And then if it works, great, stick with it. If it doesn't work, start the process over and find a new lane, find a new path.
Yeah.
Because you've got years and years and years ahead of you to do all that. And those are my two biggies.
Yeah, and look, just to take you up on what you said before, it's no different here. It's no different. The tradition is, okay, you leave school, go to university, get a degree, and then you get a good job, get well paid. And as you said, it's huge responsibility on people at a very young age to make that decision. And I don't know about you, but when I went to university, I got there and I realized there's all these other things to do I didn't even know about. So too much expectation at too younger age. And like you said, I think it's great if you can have this more open-minded attitude so that you don't feel confined. You've gone down one track, you realize it's not for you, then you don't feel there's an issue to then change. But society's sort of dictated that, oh no, you've decided you're going to be a doctor, so you really do need to be a doctor now. It doesn't really work.
And they've defined experimentation as failure.
Yeah.
You don't follow the dots. You decide to get off that track and go some different direction. You've just failed, as opposed to you're experimenting and trying things out and seeking what makes sense for you. It's crazy, but in our country, because of the COVID thing and almost coordination with the pandemic, kids started realizing that there was so much money being demanded of them and their parents in student loans to get these degrees, because that's what the formula said. But the society had changed, the globalized economies, et cetera, that what was being rewarded out there was very hard skills like medicine, and like engineering and accounting. What wasn't being rewarded was liberal arts education or sociology or philosophy or So what do you do when you've got $300,000 in student debt and you got a degree in social sciences, and the only job you can get is for $45,000 a year? You feel like you got lied to by everybody, and you're in debt. And there's a huge population of young people in the United States that are in that situation right now. The job market has shifted to more technical and more finite, hard content, and they aren't going to school thinking about that. They're going to school grabbing, and their parents say, you have to have a college education. I don't care what it is. You have to have a degree. And the fact that they don't give them any guidance, they never look at the actual market out there. They never ask the kids, what do you want to do? Well, I want to be an artist. Well, you need to go to an art academy then, or an art institute. Okay, let's do that instead of a liberal arts education. So there's a big disconnect, and there's a lot of people that are in their late 20s right now in this country that may change the cycle. They may tell their kids, no,
don't do that.
You want to be a plumber, you want to be a carpenter, you want to be a woodworker, you want to learn how to build and refurbish sailboats. There's vocational schools for that. Go do that. There's no one way to success. There's no one way to happiness. And, I'll support you wherever you want to do. But, you should try to do something that will pay the bills at the other end of it, at least.
Yeah, and I think too, part of it though is also to really enjoy what you're doing and be passionate about it. And in my opinion, the more you enjoy what you do, the more passionate you are, the more likely you are to succeed. If you're doing something you don't really like, and I recall a friend of mine telling me how his father was an electrician and he hated being an electrician, and he was basically going to be an electrician for the rest of his life. And I thought, how sad's that? You're doing something for your career and you don't even like it. To me, it's such a
Yeah.
waste.
In this country, electricians and plumbers are making $150,000 to $180,000 a year.
Yeah.
And there isn't a single parent in America telling their kids when they're 14 to become a plumber or an electrician.
Yeah.
How's that
Yeah.
for stupid?
Yeah.
In my case, I went to 4 years of business school and then, 2 years of graduate school. And I get to my first job in financial services, and I realize they didn't teach us how to sell anything.
No.
Selling wasn't in the curriculum.
No.
Well, in the real world, selling is a part of everything.
Everything. Absolutely.
Everything. And and I'm like, holy crap, how could I have gone through all that education in business and not know the first thing is you need a customer or you need a client or you
Yeah.
need somebody to sell something to, and you have to know how to
Yeah.
sell. So yeah, I mean, it's a huge disconnect. And yeah, that's a key one for me, I guess.
Mm. All right. Well, Marty, thank you so much for agreeing to be Insights into Success. It's been really, really interesting. And I just admire what you've done in your life. You've had such variety in what you're doing, and the fact that you just keep going out there and doing these different things and following through. So, hugely inspirational. So thank you for taking the time to share with us.
And thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.